Hey everybody, how are you? It's me, Juan, from Just One Reader. We are actually inside my consulting room right now. This is my office, this is where I work. I'm sorry about the weird angle. I just propped my phone on top of some pillows. So I know it looks kind of weird, but I'm here waiting for my next patient, and I wanted to make a quick review of the book that I just finished reading. The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. This is a book on atheism, but it's also really a really great, deep, and incredibly well researched, well informed study of religion and of faith. But of course, from an atheist point of view. So, Richard Dawkins is one of the most important voices in atheism, I feel. He's one of those people who you can always find online giving interviews or on debates or giving lectures and or talks and stuff, and I've always found him fascinating, but I had always found this book, The God Delusion, really intimidating because Richard Dawkins is a biologist, I think. Yeah, so he's like a real scientist, kind of scientist, you know what I mean? He's not like Christopher Hitchens, who is another sort of atheist symbol or icon, whom I also really, really like. Christopher Hitchens always felt more accessible to me. So I was a little bit worried when I started reading this book because I knew that I was going to encounter some science, and I am not a very well versed person when it comes to science. There's a lot of things that I don't know, a lot of terminology that I don't understand. So I was kind of expecting to feel confused or just out of sorts. But I actually really enjoyed this book. I thought it was just incredible. So the book is divided into 9 or 10 different chapters. The chapters are quite long, and each chapter is subdivided into little paragraphs or sections that make the reading experience really easy and really enjoyable and really fast paced, actually. The reading experience was very fast paced, honestly, for the kind of book that it is. 420 pages long, with a lot of science in it, a lot of scientific terms and concepts and theories and explanations. You might think that this book would have been really hard to stomach for someone who is not a scientist, such as myself, but it was actually pretty easy to digest. It was pretty accessible and friendly for pretty much any sort of reader. So the 10 chapters are a deeply religious non-believer, the God hypothesis, arguments for God's existence, why there almost certainly is no God, the roots of religion, the roots of morality, the good book and the changing moral zeitgeist, what's wrong with religion, why be so hostile? This is one of my favorites. Childhood abuse and the escape from religion. This chapter was one of my favorites because it addresses the issue of indoctrination and how parents or teachers or educational systems promoting faith and trying to promote faith as a virtue, which is really the virtue of ignorance and acceptance of ignorance, onto children is a kind of abuse. And that chapter is incredible. He makes some incredible points, and I could definitely relate because if you didn't know this about myself, well, I attended for my entire education from age 4 till age 17, I attended a very religious school, and I encountered everything that Richard Dawkins is talking about in this book. So yeah, I definitely lived those kinds of things in the flesh. Indoctrination, fear, psychological abuse, trauma, um, acceptance of ignorance, and ignorance on many topics on behalf of religion, ignorance overall on the name of religion and faith. Um, so yeah, I can definitely relate with a lot of things that he's talking about in this book, and he's trying to expose all of that. And the final chapter is his kind of conclusion, a much needed gap. So overall, I would rate this book 4 stars, maybe 4.5. I thought it was incredibly informative, and the evidence and the thought uh, process that he uses in this book is just overwhelming. I mean, I've never believed in God, even though I was always a part of this ridiculous religious educational system. I never really made it my own. I never really bought it. I just sort of went along with it. But I've always been an atheist, and as soon as I stepped out of that damn school, I became a raging atheist. Not raging like a violent, invasive atheist, but it was just very clear that, this God and all of that is just nonsense, and it's there for a reason, but it still is nonsense and immoral. I guess I agree with Dawkins in that part. Now, my only negative uh, my only negative criticism that I would make to this wonderful piece of nonfiction is that this book is really complete. Richard Dawkins goes into a lot of different branches of science and of thought, and he has many different sort of lines of thought running throughout the book. Biology, evolution, physics, experimental psychology, evolutionary psychology, um, education, of course, philosophy, morality. There's a lot of different things that he uses to expose the delusion of religion, the God Delusion. And I thought that was a very complete book, a very complete argument for the book. However, my only negative criticism is that I feel that there is something missing. And I know that I am biased, and I'm probably only saying this because I am a psychoanalyst, but I really truly believe that the one explanation that is missing from this wonderful book is the psychoanalytical explanation for religion. It's not here, and I think it should be here. Even though psychoanalysis is not a hard science like biology or like physics or like chemistry, psychoanalysis is another kind of discipline. It's a social science. It's another kind of investigation. But regardless of that, it really provides some answers or some possible answers or some possible lines of thought that Richard Dawkins is sort of very close to. In the book, there were many times in which Richard Dawkins would make some questions and then he would just hit a wall. And I felt like, man, the psychoanalytical explanation would be so useful here. That doesn't mean to say that psychoanalysis is the big answer, but I do feel that when it comes to religion and understanding belief, not just religion, but any kind of belief, but particularly religious faith, psychoanalysis really provides a very complete, very good, and very very useful explanation. Um, of course, psychoanalysis can see religion or faith or God as many different things. It all depends on the person that we are investigating, or the group that we are investigating. To name a couple of examples, for psychoanalysis, God can be what we call a projection. It can be a displacement. It can be a transitional object to cope with certain separation anxieties. God can also be what we call a projective identification, which is a very big thing that I feel would have benefited this book. It can be many things. And I feel like I would have just loved to see that incorporated in the book. But of course, Richard Dawkins did a great effort, and what he did, using these hard sciences and philosophy and history and anthropology, he did a very complete study. And yeah, I was sort of hoping to see at least a little bit of Freud in here, because Freud studied a lot of why religion is so important to our culture and to our society and to our civilization, in terms of regulating certain very primitive forces that of course have to do with the Oedipus complex and guilt and narcissism. So to wrap this up, to finalize my review, traffic is crazy outside here. Well, to end my review, I would like to read just a tiny paragraph, which I think is my favorite part of the book. I feel like it's the paragraph that summarizes the book for me. Again, this book is so broad and so big in scope that it's difficult to summarize it, but I feel like this paragraph provides a pretty decent summary that I really enjoyed. It goes like this. The argument goes that there must be a God, because if there were not, life would be empty, pointless, futile, a desert of meaninglessness and insignificance. How can it be necessary to point out that the logic falls at the first fence? Maybe life is empty. Maybe our prayers for the dead really are pointless. To presume the opposite is to presume the truth of the very conclusion we seek to prove. The alleged syllogism is transparently circular. Life without your wife may very well be intolerable, barren, and empty, but this unfortunately doesn't stop her being dead. There is something, and this is the summary of the entire book for me. There is something infantile in the presumption that somebody else, parents in the case of children, or God in the case of adults, has a responsibility to give your life meaning and point. It is all of a piece with the infantilism of those who, the moment they twist their ankle, look around for someone to sue. Somebody else must be responsible for my well-being, and somebody else must be to blame if I am hurt. Is it a similar infantilism that really lies behind the need for a God? Are we back to imaginary friends again? The truly adult view, by contrast, is that our life is as meaningful, as full, and as wonderful as we choose to make it. And we can make it very wonderful indeed. What can I tell you? I'm not completely against religion myself. However, I've been inside the world of religion, and I have now been out of that world completely, and I can tell you the benefits are worth it. So that was the God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. If you want to read something really informative, really important, really well written. That's something else. Richard Dawkins has an incredible writing style. He is so British and so freaking hilarious. This book was very delightful to read. It was a joyful experience. So if you're feeling like reading something like that, go ahead and read The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins.